Earlier on, we looked at the idea of analyzing visitors based on if they had come to the site before or not. We labeled these visitors new versus returning. And this is a very important metric because people who are being introduced to our site for the first time will approach and interact with it differently than people who have come before and maybe visit frequently. So let's take a look at the new versus returning report again now. You find it under the behavior group, which is part of the audience category. Similarly to our other reports, we have the session metric open at the top. And if we scroll down to the table, we see both user types listed with some data associated to each. And remember, we can change the table view if we'd like to by clicking on one of the table icons right here. It might be nice to see this data in the form of a percentage, for instance. And here we are. In this case, it looks like new visitors account for about 55% of our traffic, and returning visitors account for about 45%. So what would be interesting to do is look at either subset to find out if, say, all returning visitors exhibit similar behavior to each other. And we can do that by drilling down into this information a bit more to see what is actually happening when returning visitors come back to our site. The first report that does that is the frequency and recency report just below new versus returning. So let's go there now. What this report shows is how many times users are coming back to the site using the count of sessions metric. And you can see this in the first column on the left. So of my 635 sessions over the time period I selected, 347 of them came one time. And this is about 54%, which we can see if we hover over the graph. This table also shows us how many total page views for each session count as well. One session is the primary amount, which makes sense to me based on what our website features. But we are getting some occurrences of people visiting our site on multiple occasions. This gives us insight into the behavior of our viewers. Of the returning visitors, how many come back one time, two times, or more? At the top, we can also get a different report called Days Since Last Session, and I'll click on it. What this does is shows us how many days there are between sessions. The table view goes between 0 and 60 days. The next report I'd like to look at is the engagement report. This is located right beneath frequency and recency. As we explore Google Analytics, we come across the average session length metric. This tells us how long on average visitors are staying on our site. Well, the engagement report allows us to dig in deeper into this metric. And what we see in the table below is session duration, and each row has a different range, 0 to 10 seconds, 11 to 30 seconds, etc. And what I see is the majority of visitors are only visiting for a few seconds before they leave. Now, this could be for a couple reasons. One, the site is a service provider, though there are some retail products for sale, so it's quite possible people are visiting the site to look for contact information. Another reason is we're just simply not engaging our visitors well enough, so the majority of people that visit immediately think, this isn't relevant content for me, and then they bail. We can dig a little bit deeper into this by selecting into page depth. What this does is shows us how deep people are getting into the site before they leave. That means essentially how many pages are they viewing before they leave. And you can see I have about 500 of the sessions end after one page, about 50 after 2 pages, etc. So let's go back to the session duration and look a little bit closer. You can see that we do have a fair amount of sessions that last between 30 and 180 seconds. What we can do is use this report to get a better idea of how the site is trending over time. Can we begin to lower the percentage of visitors who stay for 10 seconds or less? Can we boost the overall duration? This encourages me to look at how people are getting to the site. If the majority are coming from, say, a landing page that I created, maybe from a pay-per-click campaign, is my landing page or are my ads written such that they are fairly representing what's on my site? If not, and people think they are getting one thing but instead get another, that could definitely lead to quick durations. Something we'll talk about a little later on is looking at which types of content have the lowest amount of session duration. So we can change that content to try to get people to stay longer and explore the site. We can also consider bringing in segments into this view. Maybe it's a particular country that's contributing a high percentage of short sessions. For example, if I notice that I'm getting a high volume of visitors from Germany, but I'm not supporting German language on my site, that would definitely lead to someone from Germany leaving the site quickly. If they can't understand the content, then why would they stay? So we can use segments to filter out traffic from Germany, or only allow English-speaking traffic data so we can get a better idea of how our content is faring with folks who can understand it. Do our session durations go up? Do we increase the number of people who view multiple pages? The next report group I'd like to discuss is the technology reports. A big reason why a site either succeeds or fails is its ability to render our content and allow users to interact with it, how we intend them to. To find this out, we use the technology and mobile reports. The first one we'll look at is the browser and operating system report, and I'll scroll on down to the table. On the left is a list of the most popular browsers visitors are using to access the site. You can see that Chrome accounts for about 60% of the viewers, and Safari accounts for almost 20%. Then Firefox, Internet Explorer, etc. This is really helpful in understanding what browsers we need to test our site out on to make sure that it's running properly. And when we make any adjustments to the site, add content or functionality, we need to test out on Chrome and Safari first, because that's how the vast majority of our visitors are accessing our site. To get a little bit deeper, we can select a browser. So I'll select Firefox. And if we scroll on down to the table, we can see the different browser versions that are accessing the site and what percentage of users are using each version. For instance, about 55% are using version 41, while only about 1.5% of visitors are using 33. And remember, this is a subset of the whole. We're not talking about percentage of overall users, we're discussing percentage of Firefox users. So 1.5% of Firefox, which only accounts for 10% of our overall traffic, is quite small. Knowing this, we can determine if it's even worth supporting that browser version at all. Going back up to the All link, we can also choose to view operating system. That's what OS stands for. And as you can see, in the table, almost 40% of the visitors are viewing the site on a Windows computer, and 27% are viewing from a Mac. We also have iOS, which is iPhone and iPad, and Android, Linux, and Windows Phone. This gives us an understanding of the platforms that the user's on, and since Windows Phone makes up such a small percentage of our users, that would be the last thing I would test out the site on. Clearly, Windows and Mac are significantly more important on the user numbers. We can also select the network report beneath browser and OS. And this gives us an idea of the most popular service providers with our users. And this isn't always helpful, but I'll give you a use case in which you might want to interact with this report. Say during a time period, probably a short time period, like one day, you see a pretty dramatic decrease in sessions. Well, one thing you might check is if that corresponds to an outage with one of the service providers. If Comcast goes down and that makes up 6 or 7% of our user base, and we see a corresponding hit to our sessions, well, then we would know that the culprit is Comcast. Let's look at the mobile reports next. I'll select Overview, which is located underneath the technology reports. This gives us an overview of the devices that are being used to look at our site. Initially, it's not showing us only mobile. Instead, we're getting a device category view which shows us how many sessions or visits are coming from people on a desktop device, mobile device, or tablet. Now, in my case, about 68% of the visitors are using a desktop, and about 28% are using mobile. This means, although mobile is very important, it still happens to be that the majority of our viewers are on their computer. So the first thing we always want to do is make sure our site and content look amazing on a desktop. And mobile is important, but secondary. For some of you, I'll bet that this skews exactly opposite. I'll bet some of you will see a big majority of viewers come from mobile, and this really has to do with the nature of the product or service you have. If you work and sell things or provide a service out of a location people go to, like a retail spot or say you're a hairdresser, I bet many of your visitors will visit your site on their mobile device because they'll use it to find you. If that's the case, you need to adopt a mobile first strategy when building or changing your site. Make sure your site looks good on whatever your customers are viewing it from. If it's a mobile device, make sure your site is responsive, which means it adjusts to the size of the screen it's being viewed on. For you, if you break something on mobile, you're going to lose a bunch of views. We can also select devices from the mobile reports view. And now we can see, of our mobile users, which device that they're using. About 60% of my mobile users are using an Apple device, iPhone or iPad. So this tells me that Apple products are my priority when getting our site to work well on a mobile device. We can also interact with the primary dimensions up at the top. An example is we can look at the operating systems our mobile users are using. Unsurprisingly, based on our last report, iOS is the most popular by about 60%. That's the same percentage of people using Apple devices, and iOS is the operating system for Apple. Second is Android, and last is Windows Phone, which makes up a pretty small percentage and thus is our lowest priority. And as I consider our mobile strategy, we seemingly need to make iOS the priority. Okay, so we looked at behavior and technology reports in this video to determine how visitors to our site interact with it in terms of frequency and page views, and also how they interact with it in terms of platform and browser. Take some time to explore these reports to understand your site traffic.